I remember when my brother was born, people would say, "Isn't it great that Mrs. Bell has a boy now?" As a small child, I found that difficult. I knew I wanted to be an astronomer, but at that stage, there weren't any women role models that I knew of. Even when I got engaged to be married, many people would congratulate me on that and say nothing about making a major astrophysical discovery. Pulsars.
The discovery of pulsars.
Tony Hewish had this particular project to pick out compact objects called quasars, the very hot topic. So the first job was to build the radio telescope that I was to use. No, you're thinking of an optical telescope that uses light. This is a radio telescope that uses radio wavelengths to pick out very, very distant objects. My presence as a female student was an anomaly. The only other females were the secretaries. At this stage, there was nobody else on this project. It was Tony Hewish and I. He's the person who's had the idea, and he's the person who's got the money to build the radio telescope, but it's my PhD. I'm running the telescope and I'm analysing the data. You end up with a long chart with a sort of squiggly line on it. Oh, there's a big source. That's routine chart analysis. And 5 minutes was 1 inch, so 1 foot for an hour, 24 foot a day. And I had 4 chart recorders going, almost 100 foot a day. There was rather more of that chart paper than I had imagined, I must say, yes. One day I was looking for quasars, and there was a signal there that I couldn't explain. It wasn't a quasar, and it didn't look like any kind of interference that I've seen before. I shouldn't be seeing something like that. I wanted to understand what it was. And I ended up taking this problem to Tony, and he said that it was interference. He had one idea that Jocelyn had wired up the radio telescope wrongly, and it was something to do with that. I kept observing, and this thing took up about a 1/4 inch on the charts. You actually need an enlargement to run the chart faster under the pen so everything gets spread out. So I would go out to the observatory, turn the chart onto high speed while it should have been there. At the appropriate time, switch the high speed recording, and in comes pulse, pulse, pulse. What is this? We wrote up a paper announcing the first one. And when it was published, it produced an enormous amount of interest.
Are entirely new.
The press would ask Tony about the astrophysical significance of this discovery. And then they'd turn to me for what they called the human interest. How many boyfriends did I have at once?
Oh, yes.
Would I describe myself as brunette or blonde?
Nothing in nature could do this.
What were my bust, waist and hip measurements? How tall was I? The photographers were the worst. They wanted me to undo some buttons on my blouse.
A girl, the Jocelyn Bell.
The popular press were certainly putting me in the little girl, sexually attractive role. I barely rated as a scientist. Tony just let it happen. It was dreadful. It was the announcement of the Nobel Prize.
Professor Anthony Hewish, the discovery of pulsars, for which you played a decisive role, is a most outstanding example of how, in recent years, our knowledge of the universe has been dramatically extended.
They'd given the prize jointly to Martin Ryle, who was the head of the Cambridge Radio Astronomy Group, and to Tony for pulsars. I think the fact that I was a graduate student and a woman together demoted my standing in terms of receiving a Nobel Prize. It didn't bother me. I was actually pleased. I was really pleased that pulsars were considered important enough to rate a Nobel Prize. The very name pulsar is an abbreviation of pulsating radio star. It's the remains of a big star that exploded near the end of its life. And this tiny star is spinning, and as it spins, it sweeps a radio wave around the sky. And if it shines in your face, you see pulse, 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 pulse. But if it doesn't shine in your face, you don't see anything. July 2018, I had a phone call from Ed Witten, who's a very eminent Princeton physicist, saying that I'd won this breakthrough prize for the discovery of pulsars. Fred Hoyle influenced me and turned me on to astronomy. It's important to be a good role model. I do think it's important that there are role models for young women, so okay, I'll be it.